I watched the great ironwood sway when there was no wind, its limbs bowing as if some immense weight passed from bough to bough above us. The night insects had fallen silent. Even the frogs held their breath. Something dripped steadily from the canopy, thick and warm upon my face and hands. When I raised my lantern, the leaves glistened darkly, and from the blackness overhead there dangled one bare human foot, hooked where no man could stand. Men have pressed me these many years to set down what befell us on that march into the Ashanti forests, and I do so now with more misgiving than pride. If you would hear further accounts of such journeys, and weigh for yourself which company you might have kept, I ask that you lend your attention, give your approval, and leave your own recollections below. To understand how we came to stand beneath that tree, I must return to the beginning, to the dry season of 1903, when my faith in the catalogue of natural history was still unshaken. I was then a younger man, a surgeon attached to a small Anglo-Ashanti survey under Captain Edward Henderson, charged with mapping the upper reaches of the Tano River along the border of the Gold Coast and the French territories. Our orders were simple on paper: to fix more accurate positions for the villages of the Sefwi and to note any routes that might serve for trade or, if need be, for troops. We carried a prismatic compass, plane table, chains, a sextant, and the usual complement of Martini Henry rifles and cartridges, more from habit than expectation of use. We left Kumasi on the 4th of January. A column of 16 carriers and 4 Europeans: Henderson, myself, Lieutenant Arthur Briggs, a keen young officer of engineers, and Mr. James Wilcox, a naturalist in the employ of the Royal Society, who had come to collect specimens of Lepidoptera, and, as he said with a laugh, any oddities that might trouble the tidy shelves of London. Our interpreter and guide was Kofi Mensah, an Ashanti who had worked with British columns during the War of 96 and spoke our tongue with a grave precision. The first days were unremarkable. The forest pressed close, but not oppressively so. Tall silk cotton and mahogany trees rose like pillars, their buttresses green with moss, and creepers hung in curtains from the higher branches. The air was heavy and moist, but the rains had not yet broken, and the paths between the villages were firm underfoot. We rose with the light, took bearings, measured distances by chain and stride, and in the evenings, Wilcox would set out his killing jars and pins, while Henderson marked our progress upon the map. It was on the 3rd day, as we moved westward from Sefwi Wiauso towards the lesser-known hamlets along the Tano, that I first noticed what I later came to regard as a sign, though at the time I dismissed it. We had halted at a small clearing to take a noon rest. The men spread their loads, and I sat upon a fallen log to smoke my pipe. The usual chorus of the forest, cicadas, birds, the distant chattering of monkeys, wove about us. Then, quite suddenly, the sound changed. It did not cease entirely, as it would before a storm, but thinned, as if a curtain had been drawn over it. The nearer insects fell quiet, and the monkeys gave a brief, sharp series of cries, and were gone. In their place there came a faint, rhythmic creaking, like the slow rocking of a ship at anchor, though there was no wind to stir the branches. The great trees above us seemed to sway against the stillness of the air. "Do you feel that?" Wilcox asked, lowering his net. "The air is odd, close, even for this place." I felt a faint pressure in my ears, as if we had climbed a great height, though we had done no such thing. The hair upon my forearms prickled. "It is the heat," I said. "We are not acclimatized as the men are." Henderson glanced upward, then at Kofi. "Storm coming." Kofi listened, his head slightly tilted, then shook it. "No storm, Captain. Perhaps a great bird in the trees." "Then it will not trouble us," Henderson replied, and ordered the men to their feet. Within a few minutes, the ordinary sounds returned, and I put the matter from my mind. Had I understood the warning contained in that subtle alteration of the forest's voice, I might have urged a different course. But at that time, I was a man of medicine and charts, not of omens. That evening, as we camped near a narrow stream, there occurred the first of those small human moments that now seemed to me like photographs preserved in amber. The carriers had built our shelters of poles and palm fronds, and a fire burned low in the center. The air smelt of smoke and damp earth. I sat with Henderson and Briggs, sharing a tin of bully beef and the last of a bottle of gin. "So, what will you do when we are back in Kumasi, Doctor?" Briggs asked. "Another tour, or will you take ship for England?" "I have an offer from a hospital in Portsmouth," I said. "A small practice, nothing distinguished. But there is a woman there who has waited with more patience than I deserve." "Then you are engaged?" Henderson asked with a rare softening of his severe features. "Not formally," I admitted. "I meant to settle that matter on my return. I thought I should not ask her to bind herself to a man who might be carried off by fever in the bush." Wilcox laughed quietly. "You put too much weight upon the perils of the bush, Doctor. I have spent 10 years chasing butterflies in worse places than this, and here I sit, stout as a bishop. Men die more often of boredom at home." Briggs poked at the fire. "I mean to write my father," he said. "Tell him that the maps he drew in his study are not half so impressive as the country itself. He has never left Surrey, you know. He believes the world ends at the Channel." "It does, for many," Henderson said. "We are the few who know better." He spoke without boastfulness. It was a simple statement of fact, and I felt then a sense of quiet fellowship with these men, as if we shared a small fire in a very large darkness. The next day brought us to a region less frequented by traders. The path dwindled to a mere track, and the forest closed in more tightly. The trees here were older, their trunks broader, their crowns forming a higher, denser canopy. Light filtered down in green shafts, and the undergrowth was thick with ferns and thorny shrubs. We made slower progress, and Henderson grew impatient, urging Kofi to find the straighter way. "There is a village ahead, Captain," Kofi said. "Domiabra. The people there are Sefwi, but they trade with those beyond the Tano. They will know the paths." We reached Domiabra in the late afternoon. It was a small settlement of mud huts with thatched roofs, set in a rough circle around a great tree whose branches spread out like an umbrella. Children stared at us from behind their mothers' cloths, and a few men came forward, their expressions guarded. Henderson spoke through Kofi, explaining our purpose. The headman, an elderly man with a narrow face and sharp eyes, listened without enthusiasm. "You may sleep outside the village," he said at length. "There, by the big tree. We will bring food, but you must not go into the forest to the north after dark." "Why?" Henderson asked. "There are things in the trees there," the headman said. "They are not for you." Kofi translated this with a certain reluctance. When Henderson pressed for more, the old man shook his head. "It is not our business to speak of them," he said. "We do not go there. You should not go. I saw the familiar spark of irritation in Henderson's eyes when confronted with what he regarded as superstition. Tell him we are here in the name of the king, he said. We will go where our work requires. Kofi translated, but with a softness that I suspected omitted the full force of Henderson's declaration. The headman only shrugged. The king does not live in the trees, he said. Sleep and go on your way in the morning. That night, we made our camp beneath the great tree at the village's edge. It was an ironwood, Kofi said, though of a kind I had not seen before, its bark dark and smooth, its branches twisting high overhead into a broad, interlaced crown. The villagers kept their distance, bringing us plantains, cassava, and a pot of stew, but they did not linger. I noticed that none of their huts were built within the shadow of the tree, and that no children played near it. As we sat by our fire, Wilcox produced a small notebook. Kofi, he said, what did the old man mean about things in the trees? Kofi stared at the flames for a moment. There are stories, he said, from the old people, of beings that live in the branches. They are not spirits and not animals. They are something between. Monkeys, Briggs suggested. No, Kofi said. They are not monkeys. They are called Asanbosam in some places, in others Asanbosam. They hunt at night. They take men. Wilcox's eyes brightened with the curiosity of his profession. What do they look like? Kofi hesitated. They are said to be like men, but with long legs and feet that turn outwards, with hooks instead of toes. They do not walk upon the ground. They hang from the branches. When a man passes beneath, they drop upon him. Bosh, Henderson said, but without much heat. Every country has its ogres to keep children from wandering. Kofi did not argue. I am only telling what is said, he replied quietly. I confess that I smiled inwardly at this recital. I had heard many such tales in my years abroad, and though I had learned to respect the practical knowledge of the people among whom I worked, I had never yet found a creature that could not be classified within the known orders of zoology. I went to my bedroll that night with no greater anxiety than the usual concern for mosquitoes. Nevertheless, I woke twice in the dark hours, uncertain of what had disturbed me. The second time, as I lay still, I became aware of a faint, irregular noise above us. It was not the rustling of leaves in a breeze, for the air was quite still, nor the movement of monkeys, which is more rapid and accompanied by chattering. This was a slow, creaking sound, as of a rope bearing a weight, followed at intervals by a soft, wet patter. I lay listening, my heart beating rather faster than the occasion warranted. After some minutes, I told myself that it was only the settling of the great branches, or perhaps fruit falling from the tree. Presently, I slept again. In the morning, as the men packed our loads, I noticed dark stains upon the canvas of one of the tents and upon the leaves around it. At first, I thought it was the residue of some fruit, but when I touched it, it was tacky, and when I smelt my fingers, there was the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. Some animal must have been taken in the branches, I said to Henderson. A civet, perhaps, or a bird. He glanced up, frowning. There is no carcass, he said. Indeed, there was none to be seen. The branches overhead were empty, save for leaves and a few torn fragments of something pale that might have been bark. The carriers crossed themselves or muttered in their own tongues. Kofi looked troubled. We should go, he said. We did so, and I did not then connect the stains with the stories of the night before. The forest swallowed us once more, and our minds returned to bearings and distances. For 2 more days we marched without incident, though I became aware of a subtle change in the demeanor of our carriers. They spoke less, and their songs, which had previously lightened the march, fell away entirely. When I asked Kofi about it, he said only, "They do not like this forest," and would say no more. On the 6th day from Kumasi, we crossed a narrow, sluggish arm of the Tano by means of a fallen tree. The water beneath was dark and still, flecked with patches of scum, and the air there was cooler, with a faint odor of decay. Beyond the stream, the forest grew yet more ancient. The trees were of a species I did not recognize, very tall and straight, with few branches until a great height, where their crowns interlaced to form an almost continuous roof. The light beneath was dim, even at midday, and the undergrowth was sparse, as if little could grow in that perpetual twilight. It was there that the second anomaly occurred. We had halted to take a bearing. Henderson stood with his compass, while Briggs held the plane table. I was attending to one of the carriers who had chafed his foot when a low murmur ran through the line. I looked up and saw that all the men were gazing in the same direction, their faces tense. Following their gaze, I saw only the ranks of tree trunks fading into the gloom. Then something moved, high above, a darker shape among the shadows. It crossed from one trunk to another with a slow, swinging motion, as if suspended from a rope. "Monkey?" Briggs said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Too big," one of the carriers muttered. The shape vanished into the canopy. A few moments later, there came a series of soft thuds behind us, as if something heavy had dropped from a height onto the forest floor at some distance. Henderson turned sharply. "Who is there?" he called. There was no answer. We stood listening. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, from somewhere to our left, there came a sound that made the skin crawl along my spine. A low, drawn-out moan, rising at the end into a sort of squeal. It was almost, but not quite, human. "Leopard," I said, because I could think of nothing else that would produce such a noise. Kofi shook his head. "No leopard," he said softly. Henderson, to his credit, did not show fear. "We have rifles," he said. "We are not here to hunt, but we are not helpless. Keep moving. We shall reach the next village before dark." We did not reach a village that day. The path, such as it was, grew fainter, and more than once we found ourselves circling to avoid fallen trees or thickets of thorn. The light faded early under the dense canopy, and Henderson was at last obliged to call a halt at a small, damp hollow where a trickle of water ran over stones. It was a poor camp. The ground was uneven, and the trees leaned inward, their branches knitting overhead so closely that we could not see the sky. The air was close and smelled of mold. The men built only small fires, as there was little dry wood. I felt a peculiar heaviness in my limbs and a dull ache behind my eyes, as if the forest itself pressed upon me. That night, while the others slept, I sat with Kofi by the embers. He stared into the darkness between the trunks. "You are troubled," I said. "This is not a good place," he replied. "The trees here are old. They remember things." "You speak as if they were men," I said, attempting a lightness I did not feel. He did not smile. "The old people say that when men die badly in the forest, their blood goes into the roots and the trees drink it. Some trees grow fat on such blood. They become different. "And from such trees come your Asanbosam?" I asked. He glanced at me. "You may laugh, Doctor, but there are places in this forest where no birds sing and no animals go. We are near such a place." I could not deny that the silence here was of a different quality. Even the constant background chirring of insects seemed muffled, as if by a heavy cloth. "You have seen these beings?" I asked. "No," he said, "I have not. But my grandfather spoke of a man who went into the forest to cut wood and did not return. They found his axe and his cloth, but no body, only marks upon the tree where something had hung, and there was blood upon the leaves, high up where no man could reach." I thought of the stains upon our tent at Domiabra, and for the first time a small thread of unease wound itself about my heart. "Still," I said, "there are many ways a man may die in the forest. A fall, a snake, a leopard." "Yes," Kofi said, "many ways. This is only one." We slept poorly. I woke several times to the sensation of being watched, though when I raised myself and peered into the gloom beyond the circle of our small fire, I saw nothing. Once, I heard a faint scraping, like claws upon bark high above. Another time, there was the soft, wet sound of something dropping onto leaves. I told myself that it was only the ordinary life of the forest, magnified by my imagination. In the morning, as we prepared to move on, one of the carriers, a man named Kojo, failed to answer when his name was called. His hammock was empty, his few possessions still beneath it. There was no sign of disturbance upon the ground. "He has gone to the bush," one of the others suggested, "for his needs." We waited, but he did not return. Henderson's jaw tightened. "Search the immediate area," he ordered. We spread out, calling Kojo's name. The forest swallowed our voices. I found no trace of him, but near the edge of the camp I came upon a tree whose bark was scarred by 4 deep grooves, as if something with great strength had dragged hooked points down its trunk. The marks began high above my head and ended at a height where a man's shoulders might be. I ran my fingers along the grooves. The wood was fresh and pale beneath the torn bark. At the base of the tree, among the fallen leaves, there were a few drops of something dark already drying. When I showed this to Henderson, he frowned. "He may have climbed and fallen," he said. "There is no sign of a fall," I replied. "No broken branches below, no disturbance of the ground, and these marks begin too high for him to have made them from the ground." "Then he climbed with a rope," Henderson said impatiently. "We cannot waste the day on one foolish carrier. If he has deserted, he will find his own way." Kofi said nothing, but his expression was bleak. The other men muttered among themselves. I saw fear in their eyes. That day, our progress slowed further. The path became little more than a memory, and we were forced to hack our way through tangles of creepers and thorn. The forest seemed to darken around us. Several times I caught the faint odor of something musky and sour, not unlike that of a large carnivore, but heavier, with an undertone of rot. It came and went on the still air, impossible to fix. Towards afternoon, as we paused to drink from our canteens, the micro-shock that has remained, burned into my memory, occurred. Briggs was standing a little apart from the rest, consulting his compass, when there came a sharp crack from above, as of a branch breaking. We all looked up instinctively. For an instant, no more than a heartbeat, I saw a shape descending towards him, a dark mass against the dim green. It was not falling, but swinging, as if at the end of some invisible tether. I glimpsed something pale within it, like the underside of a limb and a flash of what might have been metal. "Look out!" I cried. Briggs started and stepped back. At that exact moment, there was a violent jerk above, as if whatever had been descending had checked itself. The shape arrested its swing and vanished upward into the leaves with a rustle and a low, guttural grunt that made the blood chill in my veins. A length of creeper, freshly torn, fell at Briggs's feet, its end frayed and wet with sap, or something thicker. He stood very still, his face drained of color. "What was that?" he whispered. "A great ape," I said, my voice sounding thin in my own ears. "They are known to swing by their arms." "There are no apes in this part of Africa," Wilcox said quietly. "Only monkeys. And that was no monkey." We looked to Kofi. He did not meet our eyes. "We should go back," he said. Henderson's mouth was a hard line. "We have come too far to turn now," he replied. "Another day, perhaps two, and we shall have what we came for. Then we shall return." The carriers exchanged glances. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Mensa, said something in a low voice. Kofi translated. "He says that if we go on, we go without them." Henderson stared at the man. For a moment, I thought he would give the order to press on regardless, but then some calculation passed behind his eyes. We could not carry our equipment without the men. "We shall camp early," he said at last. "We shall consider our position in the morning." We found a slightly more open space between the trees and set our small tents in a tight circle, with the carriers' hammocks strung between the trunks around us. Henderson ordered double watches and insisted that the fires be kept up all night. The men obeyed, but I saw that their hands shook as they gathered wood. That evening, there was little talk. The sense of camaraderie that had warmed our earlier camps was gone, replaced by a strained silence. Even Wilcox, usually irrepressible in his curiosity, sat with his notebook closed upon his knee, staring into the darkness. After some time, he said quietly, "If there is some large arboreal predator here, unknown to science, we may be the first to describe it. Provided we live to do so," Briggs muttered. Wilcox gave a thin smile. "There is that, of course." "What would you call such a creature, Doctor?" he asked me, perhaps seeking some normalcy in professional discourse. "If it exists?" "Until I have seen it, I shall not presume to name it," I said. "And I do not yet concede its existence." Even as I spoke, I knew that my words were more stubbornness than conviction. The marks on the tree, the disappearing man, the near miss above Briggs, the unnatural sounds and silences, all these weighed upon my mind. Yet to admit that there might be some being in the trees that did not fit within any known order was to step beyond the firm ground of reason into a region as shadowed as the forest around us. The night that followed was the longest of my life. I took the first watch with Briggs. We sat back to back, our rifles across our knees, the firelight casting flickering shadows upon the trunks. The forest beyond that small circle of light was an impenetrable wall of black. At first, there was the usual chorus of nocturnal insects, though even that seemed muted. Then, as the hours passed, a curious phenomenon occurred. The sounds did not cease all at once, but thinned, as they had on that earlier day, until we were left in a silence so complete that we could hear our own breathing and the faint crackle of the embers. "Do you hear that?" Briggs whispered. "I hear nothing," I replied, and realized as I said it how strange that was. Then, From somewhere above and to our right, there came a soft, deliberate creak, as of a heavy weight shifting upon a branch. Another answered it to our left, then another behind us, until it seemed that the darkness overhead was full of slow, pendulous movements. Briggs's hand tightened on his rifle. "Monkeys," he said, but his voice was unsteady. "Monkeys do not move so slowly," I said, before I could stop myself. There was a faint, wet sound, like the drip of water from a saturated cloth, and something warm fell upon my hand. I jerked, raising my lantern. Upon the back of my hand was a dark, viscous drop. I touched it with my finger and brought it to my nose. The metallic scent of blood filled my nostrils. "Dear God," Briggs breathed. We raised our lanterns higher, their feeble light probing the lower branches. For a moment, I thought I saw something hanging there, just beyond the reach of the light. A long, pale curve, like a leg, ending in a foot that bent at an unnatural angle. Its toes, if toes they were, hooked back upon themselves. Then the branch swayed, and the shape withdrew into the dark. A low, rasping chuckle sounded above us, horribly like the laughter of a man whose throat had been cut. "Wake the others," I said. We roused Henderson and Wilcox, then the carriers. Men stumbled from their hammocks, faces bleary with sleep and fear. The creaking and dripping above continued, now from several directions at once. The fires, neglected in our distraction, had burned low, and the shadows pressed closer. "More wood," Henderson ordered. "Pile it on. Keep the flames high." The men obeyed with frantic haste. As the fires flared up, casting a wider circle of light, there came a sudden movement in the branches overhead. Something large and dark swung away into the deeper forest, then another, then a third, their passage marked by the bending of branches and the sound of claws or hooks scraping bark. For an instant, against the firelight reflected on the leaves, I saw one of them in profile, a gaunt, elongated body with limbs too long for its torso, the legs drawn up as it swung, and from the ends of those legs, feet that curved like sickles, catching and releasing the branches with a dreadful grace. Its skin, where the light touched it, was pale and hairless, glistening faintly, and its head, if head it was, seemed too large, with something like ears or horns swept back. I could not see its face clearly, and for that I am both grateful and forever unsatisfied. The carriers cried out in terror. One man broke and ran towards the darkness beyond the circle of light. Before Henderson could stop him, he had vanished between the trees. "Mensa!" Kofi shouted. There was no answer. For a moment, there was only the crackle of the fires and the ragged breathing of frightened men. Then, from somewhere overhead, there came a brief, choked scream, cut off as if a hand had closed over a mouth. A darker shadow moved among the branches, and something pale swung for an instant, limp. Before being drawn upward out of sight, we stood rooted, our rifles in our hands, impotent. To fire blindly into that black vault would have been worse than useless. We might as well have shot at the night itself. After what seemed an eternity, the creaking and dripping ceased. The ordinary sounds of the forest did not return. The silence that followed was like the hush in a church after the organ has fallen quiet. "We are leaving at first light," Henderson said, his voice hoarse. "We go back. No argument." No one argued. The remainder of the night passed in a sort of suspended dread. None of us slept. We sat with our backs to the fire, our eyes on the darkness, every creak of a branch magnified in our minds. Once, towards dawn, I heard again that low, rasping chuckle, farther away now, as if whatever had watched us was withdrawing. When at last the grey light filtered down through the canopy, revealing our haggard faces and the ash of our fires, we moved with an urgency that bordered on panic. The carriers packed their loads in silence. 2 hammocks hung empty. As we prepared to depart, I walked a short distance into the trees in the direction where Mensa had vanished. There, upon a low branch, I found a scrap of cloth that I recognized as part of his shirt, torn and stained dark. Upon the ground beneath were several drops of blood, and upon the trunk of the tree, at a height of perhaps 12 feet, were more of those deep, hooked gouges, as if something had hung there, bearing a man's weight. I did not call the others to see. There was nothing to be done. Our retreat through the forest was a nightmare of haste and exhaustion. Henderson set a punishing pace, driving the men with a ferocity born of fear. We stumbled over roots and through thorn thickets, our arms and faces scratched, our boots slick with mud, and worse. The forest, which had seemed merely indifferent before, now felt actively hostile. Every creak of a branch above made us flinch. Every shadow seemed to conceal some pale, hanging form. Several times as we marched, I had the sensation that we were being paralleled in the trees. There would come that faint, rhythmic creaking overhead, keeping pace with us, then a soft thud, as of something dropping from one bough to another. Once, when we paused to rest, a small object fell at my feet. It was a fragment of bone, no larger than my thumb, gnawed at one end. I recognized with a cold clarity that it was human. I did not show it to the others. I slipped it into my pocket. Though I do not know why, perhaps some part of me already thought of evidence, of proof. On the second day of our retreat, as we approached the sluggish arm of the Tano we had crossed before, we heard movement ahead. Henderson signaled for silence, and we advanced cautiously. Through the trees, we saw a small group of men from Domayabra, armed with spears and old muskets, standing on the far bank. They had evidently followed our trail. When they saw us, their expressions were a mixture of relief and dread. The headman was among them. He called across the water to Kofi. "You have seen them," he said. It was not a question. Kofi nodded. "They took 2 of our men." The headman shook his head slowly. "We told you not to go into that forest. It is not for men." Henderson stepped forward. "Ask him if he will help us return to Domayabra," he said. The headman replied before Kofi could translate. "We will watch you cross," he said. "We will not enter that forest, not even for gold." We crossed upon the same fallen tree as before, our movements clumsy with fatigue. I felt the men's eyes upon us as we did so. When we reached the far side, the headman regarded us for a long moment. "You have brought something back," he said quietly. "I can smell it on you." I thought of the faint, sour musk that had clung to our clothes. "We have brought nothing," I said. "We wish only to leave." He looked at me, and there was in his gaze a pity that stung more than contempt would have done. "You cannot leave what is in your head," he said, "or what is in the trees." They escorted us as far as Domayabra, but would not come within the shadow of the great ironwood at the village's edge. We camped there again beneath its broad crown, for there was nowhere else. I saw that the villagers had hung charms and fetishes in the lower branches since our last visit. Small bundles of feathers, bones, and cloth, as if to appease or ward off whatever dwelt above. That night, The final and most vivid encounter occurred. We had resolved to keep watch in pairs as before. I shared the second watch with Wilcox. The air was heavy and still. The villagers' huts were dark. No light showed through their walls. Even the dogs were silent. For some hours, nothing stirred. Then, perhaps an hour before dawn, I felt that familiar pressure in my ears, and the hair upon my arms rose. The night insects fell quiet one by one, until once again we were enclosed in that unnatural silence. "Do you feel that?" Wilcox whispered. "Yes," I said. From above us came a slow, deliberate creak, as of a great weight shifting upon a branch, then another and another in a circle around the camp, though there was only the one tree directly above us. It was as if the sound moved from limb to limb, encircling us in the air. I raised my lantern and shone it upward. The light reached only the lower branches, leaving the higher ones in darkness. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I discerned shapes hanging there, just beyond the reach of the light. Long, thin forms, like men stretched on a rack, their limbs elongated, their bodies swaying slightly. From the ends of their legs, those dreadful hooked feet gripped the branches, the toes curved back upon themselves like talons. One of them shifted, and for the first time I saw its face. It was pale and hairless, with a broad, lipless mouth that seemed too wide for the narrow skull. Its eyes were large and dark, reflecting the lantern light with a dull, reddish gleam. The nose was little more than 2 slits. From the sides of its head jutted small, pointed projections that might have been ears or horns or something between. Its skin was smooth and taut over the bones, giving it a cadaverous aspect, and from its mouth there protruded 2 long curved teeth, like tusks, stained dark at the tips. It regarded me without blinking. Then its mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, and it emitted that same low, rasping chuckle we had heard in the forest, a sound that seemed to scrape along the inside of the skull. I could not move. My limbs felt as if they had turned to water. Beside me, I heard Wilcox make a strangled sound. Then the creature let go with one foot, swinging slightly, and for an instant it hung by the other, its free leg reaching down towards us, the hooked foot opening and closing as if grasping. Something thick and warm dripped from its body, spattering upon the canvas of the tent and the leaves around us. The smell that came with it was overpowering, a mixture of blood, musk, and a sour, almost vinegary taint that turned the stomach. Behind it, in the darkness, I sensed more of them, their pale limbs and faces just glimpsed between the leaves, their bodies swaying in unison like obscene fruit. "Fire," I whispered, though my tongue felt thick. "More fire." Wilcox seemed to rouse from his paralysis. He stumbled to the nearest pile of wood and threw it onto the embers with shaking hands. The flames leapt up, casting a sudden bright glare upward. In that instant, the full scene was revealed. There were at least 6 of them in the branches above, perhaps more. They hung by their feet, their bodies inverted, their arms dangling towards us, the long fingers tipped with blackened nails. Their skins were mottled with dark patches, as if stained by old blood. Their chests rose and fell rapidly, and their mouths worked, emitting a chorus of low, chittering sounds that set the teeth on edge. Between 2 of them, slung over a branch like a carcass in a butcher's shop, was something that had once been a man. I knew it by the remnants of cloth and by the shape of the hands that hung limp. The body was torn and pale, the limbs elongated in death as if they had been stretched. The head lolled, the face mercifully turned away. Wilcox cried out, a sound of pure horror. The creatures reacted at once. One swung towards us with terrifying speed, its body snapping upright in mid-air so that it seemed to stand upon nothing. Its arm shot out, the long fingers clawing at the air just beyond the edge of the firelight. Its eyes flared red. At that moment, Henderson burst from his tent, rifle in hand. Seeing the thing, he did not hesitate. He raised the weapon and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, or what I took to be its shoulder. It emitted a shriek that was almost human and recoiled, swinging back into the darkness. At the same instant, the others began to move, their bodies whipping from branch to branch with a speed and coordination that was almost beautiful, had it not been so dreadful. Branches cracked and swayed. Leaves tore free and fell around us like dark rain. The chorus of shrieks and chuckles rose, echoing between the trunks. For a moment, I thought they would descend upon us en masse. Instead, they withdrew, retreating along the limbs and into the higher canopy, their pale forms vanishing one by one into the blackness. The last I saw of them was a single hooked foot curling around a branch before disappearing. Silence fell again, broken only by the ringing in my ears and the harsh breathing of the men. The body that had hung between them was gone. "We leave now," Henderson said. His voice shook, but his eyes were clear. "We go to Kumasi. We tell them what we have seen." "It is still night," Briggs protested weakly. "Then we go in the dark," Henderson replied. "Better the forest than this tree." We broke camp in a frenzy of haste, stuffing canvas and gear into packs, abandoning what we could not carry easily. The villagers watched from the edge of their huts, their faces pale in the dawn-grey light, but they did not approach. As we passed the headman, he spoke to Kofi without looking at us. "You have seen them," he said. "Now you know why we do not build beneath such trees." We did not answer. Words seemed a poor currency. The march back to Kumasi was a blur of exhaustion, fear, and feverish haste. The forest seemed lighter as we moved away from that region, but whether that was in truth or only in our minds, I cannot say. The carriers, reduced in number and spirit, plodded on in grim silence. At night, we camped in open places when we could, and always with great fires, though none of us slept deeply. Once, 2 days from Domiabra, as we skirted a small hill, we heard a distant sound from the forest behind us, a low, drawn-out moan, rising into a squeal, followed by that rasping chuckle. It was faint with distance, but its quality was unmistakable. We did not speak of it. When at last we emerged from the forest into the more open country near Kumasi, with its scattered farms and red earth roads, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The sky was wide again, the sun bright. Yet even there, when I glanced at the few solitary trees that stood by the fields, I found myself scanning their branches, half expecting to see some pale form hanging there. In Kumasi, we presented ourselves to the resident, a Colonel Markham, a man of stiff bearing and limited imagination, as such men often are. He received us in his office, the punkah moving lazily overhead, the walls adorned with maps and hunting trophies. He took one look at our faces and sent for brandy. "You look as if you have been dragged through hell," he said. "What befell you? Fever? Hostile villages?" Henderson told the story, or rather, a version of it. He spoke of the difficult terrain, the loss of 2 carriers to unknown causes, the strange sounds and movements in the trees. He did not, at first, describe what we had seen in detail. As he spoke, I watched Markham's expression. It moved from concern to skepticism to a sort of polite impatience. "You are telling me," he said at last, "that there is some species of great ape in that forest that has hitherto escaped notice, and that it took your men from the trees like a leopard? I am sorry for your losses, Henderson, but we must be rational. Men desert. They get lost. They are taken by ordinary predators. The bush is full of perils." "It was no ape," Henderson said quietly. "I have hunted in India and Africa. I know what an ape looks like. This was something else." Markham's lips thinned. "You are tired," he said. "You have been under strain. The imagination plays tricks in such circumstances. I have seen it before. Men see devils in the dark when it is only their own shadows." He turned to me. "Doctor, you are a man of science. What do you say?" I hesitated. In that moment, I felt the weight of two worlds upon me: the ordered, rational world of medicine and maps, and the shadowed, whispering world of the forest. To affirm what I had seen would be to place myself beyond the pale of respectable opinion, yet to deny it felt like a betrayal of the dead. "I can say only what I observed," I replied slowly. "We heard sounds that I cannot attribute to any known animal. We found marks on trees and traces of blood at heights and in patterns that do not accord with leopards or men. We saw forms in the branches that did not resemble any primate known to me." Markham snorted softly. "Forms, sounds, marks. In the dark, in a fever-ridden forest, with nerves frayed. You will forgive me if I do not revise the zoological records on that basis." He took up his pen. "I shall note in the report that the expedition was forced to turn back owing to the loss of carriers under uncertain but presumably natural circumstances, and to the difficulty of the terrain. That will suffice for the Colonial Office." "And what of the villagers' tales?" Wilcox asked. "They know of these beings. They name them." "Savage superstitions," Markham said dismissively. "Every tribe has its bogies. The Asanbosam, the Tokoloshe, the Wendigo, names to frighten children and explain misfortune. We are not in the business of lending them official credence." He looked at each of us in turn. "I advise you, as a friend, to be cautious in how you speak of this matter. Men in London are quick to laugh at what they do not understand, and slower to forgive those who disturb their comfortable ignorance. You have your careers to think of." There it was, boldly stated, the choice between truth and reputation. We left his office in a silence heavier than any that had fallen in the forest. Later, in the privacy of our quarters, we spoke more freely. Henderson paced the room like a caged animal. "He will bury it," he said. "He will write his bland report, and in a year, no one will remember that two men were taken into the trees and never came down." "Would you have him write that there are devils in the branches?" Briggs asked, his voice brittle. "They would laugh him out of the service." "They might," Wilcox said, "but at least the record would be honest." He turned to me. "We could publish our own account in the journals. The Royal Society, perhaps. We have our observations. I have sketches." He opened his notebook, and I saw with a jolt that he had indeed drawn what he had seen. Elongated bodies, hooked feet, pale, broad faces with tusk-like teeth. The lines were shaky, but the likeness to my own memory was undeniable. "Show that to a man in Bloomsbury," Briggs said, "and he will say you have been reading too many romances." Wilcox's hand trembled slightly as he closed the book. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps I shall keep it to myself, for now." In the end, no official account of the Asanbosam appeared. The expedition's report, filed with the Colonial Office, spoke of unfavourable conditions and the regrettable loss of native labourers to the hazards of the bush. Our maps showed a blank space where the older forest lay. The name Domeabra appeared, but without annotation. We four and Kofi carried the private truth. Years passed. I returned to England for a time and did indeed marry the patient woman in Portsmouth. I took up my post at the hospital, and for a while I lived as other men, with rounds and dinners and small domestic joys. Yet the forest did not leave me. The first scene that remains vivid is from a winter evening some years after my return. I was walking home through a London fog. The gas lamps glowing dimly, the air thick and damp. Above me, the bare branches of the plane trees along the street reached out like black fingers. As I passed under one particularly large tree, a drop of water fell from a branch onto my cheek. It was cold, not warm, but for an instant the sensation transported me back to that night in Domeabra, when something thick and hot had dripped from the ironwood onto my face. I stopped dead in the street, my heart pounding, my hand raised to my cheek. A cabman cursed as he swerved around me. The rational part of my mind told me that it was only condensation, nothing more. Yet I stood there for several minutes, staring up into the branches, half expecting to see a pale foot hooked above me. My wife asked that night why I was so quiet at supper. I told her that I was tired. The second scene occurred in the summer of 1910, when I attended a lecture at the Royal Geographical Society. The speaker was a French explorer describing his travels in what he called the Forêt Vierge of the Ivory Coast. He spoke of the great trees, the dim light, the difficulty of navigation. At the end of his talk, he mentioned, almost as an aside, that some of the local people refused to enter certain groves, saying that les hommes chauves-souris lived there, batmen who hung from the branches and drank blood. There was polite laughter in the hall. The Frenchman smiled indulgently. "Of course," he said, "these are only native superstitions. I did not see such creatures myself." I felt a chill spread through me, despite the warmth of the room. After the lecture, I sought him out. "Did they give these beings a name?" I asked. He frowned, trying to recall. "Something like Asanbosam," he said. "I did not note it. It is of no scientific interest." I walked home that night with the word echoing in my mind. I went to my small study, took down a map of West Africa, and traced with my finger the line of the Tano, the borderlands, the region of our aborted survey. Then I opened a notebook and wrote, in a hand that shook more than I liked, Asanbosam, corroborating mention from Ivory Coast explorer. No details. In the years that followed, I read what I could find on the folklore of the Ashanti and neighbouring peoples. In the writings of missionaries and anthropologists, in obscure footnotes and appendices, I found scattered references to beings of the trees. Sasabonsam, Asanbosam, with hooked feet hanging from branches, preying upon hunters and travellers. Some spoke of them as spirits, others as a kind of demon. None treated them as animals in the zoological sense. I tried, once, to speak of it more openly. At a dinner in Portsmouth, after rather too much wine, I told a bowdlerized version of our encounter to a group of colleagues, presenting it as an amusing tale of colonial superstition. They laughed at the villagers' fear, at the idea of tree devils. One man, a surgeon of some repute, said, "The real monsters in those places are the fevers and the flies." I laughed with them outwardly. Inwardly, I felt a tightening in my chest, as if a door had closed. Of the men who shared that march, I remained in sporadic contact with two. Henderson continued his service for some years, then retired to a small estate in Devon. We exchanged letters, at first on ordinary matters. Then, one autumn, I received a note from him, written in a hand more unsteady than I remembered. "Do you ever dream of the trees?" he wrote. "I do. I wake with my hands clenched as if I am still holding a rifle, and I hear that damned chuckling in the dark. My wife says I cry out in my sleep. I tell her it is only old wounds." We met once, some years later, in London. He had aged more than the time warranted. Over brandy in his club, we spoke at last, in low voices, of Domiabra and the forest. "Sometimes I wonder," he said, staring into his glass, "whether we brought something back with us. Not in our packs, but in our minds. A knowledge once gained cannot be put aside. We have seen that the catalogue is incomplete. Does that not change everything?" "It should," I said. "But for most men, it does not. They prefer the comfort of closed books." He looked up at me. "Do you ever doubt what we saw?" he asked. There was one of those rare moments when a man must answer plainly or lose something vital in himself. "No," I said. "I have doubted many things since, but not that." He nodded slowly. "Nor I." Wilcox. I saw only once more, in 1908, at a meeting of the Zoological Society. He had grown thinner, his hair greyer, but his eyes still held that spark of curiosity. We spoke briefly of his work in other regions. As we parted, he pressed a small packet into my hand. "For your private collection," he said. "Burn it if you like." At home, I opened it. Inside were several pages torn from a notebook. On them were sketches of the Asanbosam, more detailed than those I had glimpsed in Kumasi. There were notes in the margin. Hooks on feet, keratinous, dentition unusual, tusks, arboreal, perhaps entirely so, limbs adapted, and in one place, underlined twice, not ape, not man, between. At the bottom of the last page he had written, "If I die before you, you will be the last who knows that this is not mere fancy." He died in 1912 of pneumonia in some remote station on the Congo. The Society's obituary mentioned his contributions to the study of butterflies. In my own practice, I began to notice certain small, irrational habits. I would avoid walking directly beneath large trees when I could, stepping a little to one side without conscious thought. In my house, I found myself glancing at the ceiling at night, as if expecting to see the plaster bulge under some hanging weight. In the hospital, when a patient spoke of a feeling of being watched or of hearing strange sounds at night, I listened with more sympathy than my colleagues did. Once, during the war, when I served in a hospital near Ypres, a young soldier from the Gold Coast was brought in with a leg wound. He spoke some English. In the long nights, as the guns muttered at the horizon, we talked. When he learnt that I had been near the Tano, his eyes widened. "You saw the tree people?" he asked. I hesitated. "I saw something," I said. He nodded gravely. "My grandfather told me. He said, if you walk under the wrong tree, they will take you up and drink you. He said they like the taste of white men best because they are not used to it." He laughed then, but it was a brittle sound. I did not laugh. In later years, as my hands began to tremble and my eyes to dim, I more I made one last attempt to rationalize. I corresponded with a young anthropologist who had spent time among the Ashanti. I asked him, in cautious terms, about the Asanbosam. He replied with a well-argued paper on myth-making, on the personification of the dangers of the forest, on the way in which societies encode taboos in stories of monsters. It was clever and, in its way, true. Yet, as I read it, I saw again the pale hanging forms, the hooked feet, the dripping blood. There are questions I still ask myself in the small hours. Were these beings a relic of some earlier branch of the primate line, clinging to their arboreal niche as men took the ground? Were they something else entirely, born of blood-soaked roots and human fear? Or were they, as the villagers believed, spirits that had taken on flesh? I no longer expect answers. What I know is this. In a certain region of the forest along the Upper Tano, there are groves where the air grows thick and the sound drains away, where men vanish without trace, and where, if one is very unfortunate, one may look up and see, hanging above, a face that should not exist. I have written this account not to persuade, for I know too well how resistant the mind is to such things, but to unburden myself. The official record will remain as it is, bland, incomplete, safe. My private truth will perhaps die with me, or perhaps, if these pages survive, trouble the dreams of some future reader. In the end, I have come to a kind of acceptance. The world is larger and stranger than our maps allow. There are spaces, even now, where the old things persist, unwatched, patient. We may pass our laws and draw our borders, but the forest does not heed them. It has its own inhabitants, its own rules. What disturbs me most, after all these years, is not the memory of the faces, nor the sound of that rasping chuckle, nor even the sight of a man's body hanging like meat between them. It is the sensation in that first moment when I raised my lantern in Domeabra, of something warm and thick falling upon my skin from above, and the knowledge that it had fallen from a great height, from a place where no man could stand. In quiet moments when the house is still and the wind moves in the trees beyond my window, I sometimes feel again that phantom drop upon my hand. Without thinking, I raise my fingers to my nose, half expecting to smell blood. And when, in the dark, a branch outside creaks under the weight of nothing more than snow or age, I find myself listening for the slow, measured sway of something that hangs, unseen, in the higher branches, waiting for a footstep beneath.